Want to shop Walmart Black Friday deals first? Walmart Plus members get early access to our hottest deals. Join now and get 50% off a one-year annual membership. Shop Black Friday deals first with Walmart Plus. See terms at walmartplus.com.
Whether you're ordering wings for the game, whipping up a 7-layer dip, or ordering pizza, there's something about football that makes you want to eat. And this football season, Uber Eats has the best deals on game day food. No matter what you're craving, from 2-for-1 pizza to buy one, get one wings, Uber Eats will be dropping new deals each week, all season long. Uber Eats, official on-demand delivery partner of the NFL. Order now. Terms and conditions apply. See app for details.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See detail.
It is happening. After months of speculation, the next edition of the Commonwealth Games will take place in 2026. Glasgow will be the host city, with a plan to stage the event and take it into its second century. The Scottish city previously hosted in 2014. What a blast that was, and has described the 2026 Commonwealth Games as a legacy event. I'm Michael.
And I'm John, and Glasgow stepped in following the withdrawal of Victoria in Australia, which was originally announced as the host. So it's definitely happening, and in this episode of Great British Bosses from Anything But Footy, we'll find out if the future of the Games is now secured. We should also point out that our guest isn't actually British, but she was born here and is based here.
Hi, I'm Katie Sadleir. I'm the Chief Executive of the Commonwealth Games Federation, and yes, based in London at the moment.
Katie, must be a huge relief to you as an individual and for your organisation as well, as we come to the end of 2024, that we know what is happening with the next edition of the Commonwealth Games.
Yeah, it is incredibly. It's a great way to end the year. I have to say, you know, I've worked in sport for a very long time, but the last 12 months has been one of those incredibly challenging professional years. You know, with Victoria pulling out as they did with 8 hours notice, it was a real challenge to get that Games back on track. But we're really, really pleased to say that we are bringing the Commonwealth back to Scotland and to Glasgow in particular.
We'll talk about the Glasgow plan, and we've already heard a little bit about it from Commonwealth Games Scotland, but let's just reflect on Victoria. So you said 8 hours notice. That was literally the first inkling that you had that it was not going to happen.
Absolutely. You know, I was a board member, as was Dame Louise Martin, who was our past president for the Commonwealth Games Federation. So we were both board members on the Victoria Games. And I mean, it kind of went like this. So there was a request to meet with a couple of government officials who were coming to do some work in London, and they asked to meet with us. Was rather vague about what the purpose of the meeting was about, but they came and they sat down with us in our offices. We're based in 8 Storygate, right opposite Westminster Abbey, lovely place in London. They sat down and basically opened up their computer and told us that in 8 hours' time, Dan Andrews would be announcing to the state of Victoria that Victoria had decided that they were no longer hosting the Commonwealth Games. So yes, it was a fascinating. That's probably a very positive word rather than what I was actually having to deal with at the time. It was an incredibly challenging 24 hours to manage what was a situation that no one saw coming. But 8 hours notice is what we had.
And was it a political decision, Katie, or was it a sporting decision, do you think?
Oh, I think it was a political decision. I mean, you know, clearly we've moved on. And when I think of those first 3 months in the lead up, I mean, we were facing a General Assembly in November. I mean, I often think, you know, when I started in this role, you know, the first task I had was to do a lot of listening and learning about the Commonwealth, and as a movement and what its aspirations were. We launched a new 10-year strategy in June. So after listening and learning and hearing people's aspirations and getting on to Victoria, and then on July 17th, we had this announcement from the state of Victoria. And so we then had to move incredibly quickly to, first of all, make sure that our stakeholders and the family, we talk about the Commonwealth family, all our members around the world, as much as we could in terms of working with our Athletes Commission and other stakeholders, knew about this before it broke. I mean, to the extent that, it was interesting, I've just had a call with Craig Phillips, who's the chief executive of the Australian Commonwealth Games Association. He and Ben Houston, the president from Australia, were also on the board of Victoria. I had to call him that night, and I called him several times, trying to wake him up so that he knew before. And I think I got him at 2:00 in the morning in the end. I said, look, Craig, I'm sorry to do this to you, but at 7:00 in the morning, you're going to wake up to this news story. So he was absolutely shocked. So we had kind of a 24 hours of telling people what was going to happen. And then we had a period of time, which I call managing a reasonably messy divorce, which was to do with the mediation and the settlement that we secured from the state of Victoria. So that took a while to get that negotiated. And then we moved into what I refer to as the speed dating exercise, where a lot of people, it was, you were really buoyed by the fact that there were so many members and mayors and past hosts that put up their hand and said, oh, look, we'll help. But it's a big task hosting a Commonwealth Games. So some of that was political as well. But, we're working with our members to secure a games under an incredibly tight time frame was a huge exercise. But the most important thing in my mind was making sure that our members and our stakeholders were aware of what was going on, then working through as quickly as possible the settlement, and then I guess it was a good 6 months, just over 6 months, to actually find a replacement host. But it's and so thank you very much, Glasgow.
But it must have left a sour taste in your mouth. And has it actually ruled out working with Australia again in the future for any potential hosts?
No, absolutely not. I mean, Australia is a fantastic world-class event developer. I've been to so many. I mean, I think one of the things when I look at my background and taking on this role, I'm very fortunate. I've been to 8 Commonwealth Games and 4 Olympic Games in a variety of capacities. Australia has delivered some amazing events, and the Commonwealth Games Australia was absolutely gutted by what happened, as were, several of the other politicians that I kind of had to come across over the last 12 months who were all, apologizing profusely. It was a political issue. It was very much centered in the state of Victoria. I mean, they've got an Olympic Games that's coming up and it's going to be amazing. And Commonwealth Games Australia will definitely be hosts of future Commonwealth Games. And to be honest, I mean, one of the really gracious things that Commonwealth Games Australia did, and you will be aware of this, is that when we were negotiating and getting to an agreement for the Glasgow Games, they came in and offered to put some of the money that they had, I guess, in their reserves into hosting the games as well. So, 2.3 million pounds they contributing towards the Glasgow Games. So no, Australia will continue to host Commonwealth Games. I mean, clearly they have an Olympics around the corner, so it'll be a while before they pick up another one, but they are great hosts. And you mentioned that when Victoria made that decision, there were other options on the table for you as well as Glasgow? There were. I mean, the reality was we went through a really fascinating process. I mean, the first month, right away, you had the reaction from all sorts of people sort of saying, pick us, we want to step in, and some of that was, I mean, it showed you how passionate people were about the Commonwealth and the Commonwealth Games. Some of that, was people that probably didn't understand the size and the scale of what they would need to do. Others were people who were past hosts. So we kind of courted the interest that was out there for quite some time. But then, we had the other big thing that happened last year was the General Assembly. So it was going to be a big shift in terms of the governance of the Commonwealth Games movement. But at that meeting, once we got the settlement under the way, which was really to secure our future games, the board made a call to put £100 million towards incentivizing a future host, because we realized it was going to be tricky to get a games over the line in that short period of time. And at that stage, I guess a lot of the various people that were interested in it. So there's a difference between putting up your hand and saying, hey, look, I'm interested. Can you have a conversation, with going that next level to sort of say, we really want to do it. We've actually gone through the finances and we think we can actually get the right support. But there was a whole bunch of countries that were in that interesting phase, which is really useful for the future. But, you know, whether it was the conversations that we had with Malaysia and Singapore and others. I mean, even the Commonwealth Games Australia was really keen to see if they could find a replacement host in Australia. But in the end, when we went through the whole exercise about what was the most viable option for us in the time frame that we had available, and we assessed a whole bunch of things to make that decision, one being expertise that existed, facilities that existed, because we just don't have the time for the normal plan in terms of building legacy facilities. It needed to be a country that had a track record of success. And Glasgow was a really strong choice. And with having Ian Reid as the ex-CEO of the really successful Birmingham Games leading that charge, we were really excited about the opportunity of what Glasgow presented. So that was the call that was made.
And when you talk about the 100 million, the incentivization, if you like, that I presume is not going to be available 2030, 2034. But does the Glasgow plan just reset the cost point now, making it more attractive for future hosts?
Yeah, well, I guess there's two parts to that. When I sort of said earlier that we had spent quite a bit of time developing a new 10-year strategy, one of the key parts of that new 10-year strategy was saying, and me listening, instead of saying that we are almost 100 years old, like 2030 will be our 100-year celebration of the Commonwealth sport movement. And that it was time to reset and revisit what does the games of the future look like. Finding potential hosts and that long-term pipeline has been a challenge for quite some time. So we knew that regardless of what Victoria did, there was always a piece of work that was planned that looked at how should we reset and reframe the games of the future to ensure that we can build a really positive pipeline and a robust pipeline for future games. The other aspect of the strategic plan was that we heard really strongly from our membership and other stakeholders is that whilst the UK and Australia are amazing hosts for Commonwealth Games, that we want to take the Commonwealth Games outside of those traditional markets that have done it so well. And so to do that, to take a games to Africa, to take a games to the Caribbean, or many of the other countries or our member countries, that the games need to be reset and reframed in a size that was doable and feasible for some of those countries. So we always were looking at that piece of work, which said, how do we reset, reframe the games so that we can take it around the Commonwealth and that it is much more of an attractive proposition rather than a significant financial exercise for a couple of hosts. So that is definitely what Scotland is about. Scotland gives us the opportunity to do many, many things, to test some of the concepts that came around about resetting the games, to bring it into, and we will be encouraging our members we're just about to go out for the expressions of interest process for 2030 and 34. Along the lines of a reset, refreshed games. And we will be encouraging those countries that are interested in 2030 and 2034 to get very close to the Glasgow model, because there's things that we're doing there that are different. So from that perspective, it's the first step in what the future of the Commonwealth Games might look like. Now, in saying that, this Scotland has done, and Commonwealth Games Scotland and Ian and John Doig have done an amazing job at putting their hand up to deliver something in an incredibly short time frame. So we would like to think that that's not the case. So that's hard. It means you're having to make reasonably quick, nimble decisions because you just don't have the time. We were 21 months to go, I think, or maybe I'm out now by a month. But the games reset and refresh looking different is definitely part of our strategy to take the Commonwealth Games around the Commonwealth. And that's what our membership and stakeholders want us to do.
600 days to go. So just
Thank you.
A couple of things that you said there that I really wanted to pick out. So you talked about the fact that they would be testing this. So does that mean you won't have a host for 2030 by the time the games takes place because you want people to see how it works? Or are you more hoping that they kind of see how they plan and then, because again, if you don't have a host by 2026, you're then 4 years away from the next one.
No, the expression of interest process will go out. Well, actually, to be honest, we put out an expression of interest process for 2030 and 34, and there were a couple of countries that put up their name for that process, but we're revisiting now because of what actually has happened. So the aim is to, by the next General Assembly, so not this next one, we're having a virtual General Assembly this year, but by the next General Assembly that we will take a proposal for at least 2030 to that game, so next year. So when I'm talking about testing, we will run an observer program like most major events do, and we would invite countries to come and observe what has happened there.
And you mentioned about other nations stepping up and territories, because I think you had an exceptional youth games in the Caribbean. I think it was Trinidad and Tobago, wasn't it, more recently? They're the kind of countries you want to see coming through, don't you? Absolutely.
And we are in the market now, actually, for the next Youth Games, which will be 2027, and we know how popular that product is. There's been a sort of a challenge to us. We ran a sort of series of regional meetings recently with all our members, and several of them sort of said, could we seriously look at bringing a Youth Games forward every second year rather than just once every 4 years? It's a smaller product. It's about 1,000 athletes, but it certainly does give some of our smaller members the opportunity to shine on a global stage. Trinidad was amazing. Trinidad and Tobago's Commonwealth Games. So yes, we are in market, and we hope to be in a situation in March next year to be able to appoint what the next Youth Games looks like.
And is that potentially part of the future for the organisation? More events like the Youth Games in Birmingham. There was the spin-off for the iSports Games. There was talk, wasn't this, of this Commonwealth Target Games in India when shooting and archery weren't part of the programme. Is that potentially a way it could go, that we have more smaller events?
Yeah, I mean, that is linked to our new Commonwealth United is our strategic plan, our 10-year strategic plan, and the element which is about events and dynamic, innovative sports programs and working with our international federations definitely has a work stream which is about what other events should be part of a portfolio in the Commonwealth sport movement. So that, that's to do with lifting our profile constantly and driving new commercial partners, is to not just have a major event once every 4 years and then a Commonwealth Youth Games, that we want to look at other events and how we actually build that portfolio of attractive events. Commonwealth Championships, for example, although there's quite a series of Commonwealth Championships. One of the things that we're contemplating at the moment is there a way of bringing some of those together rather than one-off events into sort of more of a Commonwealth Sports Series. So there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes about what are the other events that are interested in the Commonwealth. And I mean, I'm sure this is a question that you're probably going to ask me, is that this short time frame and the getting the games up and running for Glasgow perspective does have a 10-sport program, which is a reduction clearly from Victoria, which was going to be a really large program, and a reduction from Birmingham. And that has been a really challenging decision that needed to be made for this games only. That is not saying that the games in 2030 and 2034 will be 10 sport. We see that growing back up, maybe not to a 22 sport scale, but definitely sort of more sort of a 15 to 17 sport program. A lot of the sports that didn't get involved in this games or were not appointed for this games, some of them are looking at the potential for Commonwealth Championships in the in-between period. So we are really keen to explore with international federations what we can do to actually assist with the development of Commonwealth sport, full stop.
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting. Go to your happy place for a happy price with Priceline's Black Friday sale. Save now and travel later with our best deals of the year.
Go to your happy price, Priceline.
We're in conversation on Great British Bosses from Anything But Footy with Katie Sadleir, the CEO of the Commonwealth Games Federation. You mentioned, obviously, many sports missed out this time, but the door is not shut for them. 2026 is going to be quite the summer in the UK because you do have a European Athletics Championships. You could say that's a legacy event of the Commonwealth Games because it's in Birmingham, but are you going to get the big names? I remember ahead of Glasgow in 2014, all the conversations about whether Usain Bolt would come, and he did in the end. But are they all going to come in 2026 for this new look Commonwealth Games?
Yeah, I mean, but clearly it's a tricky time frame in terms of international calendars and things that are on in 2026. We had a window that was associated with Victoria. That window is clearly now moved. But in talking to our members at our recent regional meetings, is that they're very confident that we will still have significant levels of stars at those games. There are other European competitions that will fit in quite nicely in terms of athletics, in terms of the Diamond League and some of the other championships which will have athletes from the Caribbean here. We are definitely working with our members to make sure that happens. I know that when Commonwealth Games Australia made that generous contribution, they made that commitment also that they will have their top athletes at the Commonwealth Games.
And that's what I was going to ask. Is Glasgow a good games? It's going to be a good games. There's going to be some excitement. There's going to be lots to look forward to rather than just a convenient games.
No, it's going to be a world-class games. I mean, at the end of the day, I think that the challenges that the Commonwealth sport movement was facing are not unique to the Commonwealth movement. I'm speaking at a conference next week in Glasgow, Host City Conference, and on that panel and looking at some of the questions. International events are facing challenges in terms of what hosts can and cannot afford. But everyone is committed to world-class games. It's going to be full of the drama, the excitement, the passion.
Final question on these Commonwealth Games, because I want to talk about your career, Katie, as well. What do you say to the people who say that the Commonwealth isn't relevant, that there is no relevance to the Commonwealth Games anymore?
Yeah, well, I'd love them to be sitting in all the meetings that I've had with the sports that are really upset that they're not there, with all the athletes that are very concerned that they're not having that opportunity. I mean, it you know, on one side, it's incredibly sad to be able to not have that huge large-scale games, but it is also the fact that it's been such a disappointing situation for some of those sports show how important the Commonwealths and the Commonwealth movement is. You know, the Commonwealth is growing, and you know, people get quite surprised when I say that. But you know, at our last General Assembly, we brought on 2 new members, and we have spent the last 6 months, the new president, Chris Jenkins, ex-CEO of Commonwealth Games Wales, has spent quite a bit of time working with heads of government around the Commonwealth. They recently were in Chogam at the Commonwealth Heads of Government talking about the importance of sport, the importance of the Games Reset, and it's been really exciting to see people's response to them. And I guess one of the things I should have made when I talked about, you know, is there interest? We've been talking to our members about one of the changes that we might see in the future, particularly when you talk about Africa and the Caribbean, is the co-hosting opportunity. So that it may very well be that some of our members on their own don't have all the facilities put on the games, but you bring 2 or 3 countries together in Africa or the Caribbean or the Pacific, working with maybe some of the larger countries, and you can do something quite spectacular. And we're seeing more and more of that. And there is definitely an interest in that concept from some of the governments around the Commonwealth.
Yeah, the world's certainly getting a smaller place for a lot of things, isn't it? Katie, about you. So we said earlier that you were born in Scotland, but lived in Canada and lived in Australia for a bit, but you represented New Zealand at both the Edinburgh Commonwealth Games and the LA Olympics as well. How did that all work out? How does that happen?
Yeah. Oh, look, I guess I was, my father was from Australia, from Perth, and my mother was from Glasgow. And they met in Canada, which is why we spent a bit of time in Canada. But yes, I do call myself the Commonwealth kid in the way that it is. I've got sort of scatterings in 5 of the 6 regions. I have a strong association with. Born in Scotland, brought up in Canada, lived in New Zealand most of my life. Bar the 5 years before I took on this role, when I was the head of women's rugby for World Rugby, and I lived in Dublin for a period of time. Yes, I have relatives all around the Commonwealth, so I really feel very much at home in this role.
And take us back to your competitive athletic career, because you were in one of my favourite sports. We used to call it synchronized swimming,
That's
but
what it was. I know.
I now bang the drum for artistic swimming.
Yeah.
That was your sport.
Yeah. So I kind of started off as a competitive swimmer in Canada, and synchronized swimming was really big back then. I mean, when I think of who were the leaders in synchronized swimming. So I moved from competitive swimming into synchronized swimming when I was quite young. I actually did represent, before I left Canada to go to New Zealand, Canada didn't select national teams at that stage. They just picked club teams to go and represent them internationally. So I had, in the year before I moved to New Zealand, represented Canada in a competition in Europe. But then I moved to New Zealand and continued on with synchronized swimming, and competed with my sister in the Olympic Games in 1984 in LA. And then she became my coach for the Commonwealth Games in Edinburgh. And I did a couple of world championships and various other events. And then I then went to play water polo, actually, to be honest. So it's kind of funny, when I took up the job at World Rugby, everyone just assumed because I had come from New Zealand that I was a potential black fern, which I wasn't. I'd never played rugby, just, obviously a passionate rugby supporter. But I played water polo very competitively. When I went to university in Canada at UBC, I was in a kind of a league that went across Canada and down the States, and then played water polo for my province in Vancouver. So very much water sport person. But I guess the sport that I did of international note in the main was now called artistic swimming.
So we'll be looking out for you at Tollcross in 2026, watching the swimming events taking place there. John and I say that it was the Los Angeles Olympics of 1984 that is the reason that we do what we do today. It was the event that inspired us both. Take us back there. I mean, as a competitor, we've had the privilege and the pleasure to speak to some people and work with some people that competed in 84. So it's always good to get the views from the inside. Take us back as a competitor. What was it like? All those white pianos at the ceremony, and
oh my goodness,
the spaceman and everything else.
Lionel Richie coming down in a spaceship. Yeah,
was it just amazing?
The Beach Boys in the Village doing concerts at half times, but it was actually about sport. But LA was an absolutely amazing games, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what transpires in 28. But it was kind of like a games where, well, the whole theme behind it was celebrating the stars and all athletes. It didn't matter who you were, where you came from, whether you were Zola Budd or you were Katie Sadleir. The Americans went wild in terms of putting you all on pedestals. I remember being invited to some incredible functions with celebrities from LA, movie producers and things like that. And it was you were just basically put in this kind of place where everyone wanted to sign everything that you wore, from your hat. As soon as you got outside that village, it was signature mad. But it was an amazing game. So the village was fantastic. The performance was fantastic. The New Zealand team did incredibly well. It was sad. It was a boycott. I think of both of my games, there was an element of boycotting involved in both those games, which was really sad. But they put on a games that people from LA will still remember. I still have my posters that I have around my house, which actually remind me of what an amazing experience that was. And it was the reason I actually got involved in sports management. The chef de mission for the New Zealand team was a guy called Sir Ronald Scott, and he ran the Commonwealth Games in 1974 in Christchurch. He was the head of those games. And I kind of left that games, not necessarily thinking I was going to work in sport, but definitely thinking I was going to be involved in volunteering. And I did. I was a kind of assistant chef de mission for the New Zealand team that went to Victoria, Canada. And I did a lot of volunteer management, got involved in boards at a really young age, New Zealand swimming, etc. But then I decided that I did want to make that not sport, not just my career from a volunteer and director perspective, that I wanted to work in this sector. But that was all stimulated by my experience in LA.
Final couple of questions for me, if I may. Is this the toughest gig you've had?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, it's been a tough year. But I have to say there's been some really interesting moments. Like, I keep thinking about it. At some stage, I'm going to write the book of Katie in sports management. I had some really challenging and really rewarding opportunities at World Rugby. When I came involved in World Rugby, it was at a time where women's rugby was so on the rise, coming out of the Olympics in Rio. But I was brought in to dramatically change the shape of women's rugby, to grow women in rugby and women's rugby. And I arrived at a time when there was a council of 30 people and not a single woman involved in any leadership position. So that was a really interesting, challenging year, was developing a strategy that people bought into. And by the end of that first year, I mean, knowing that we needed to change things, and we needed to change things fast. If we couldn't impact on the leadership, it was going to be very difficult to make the rest of the changes that needed to happen in that transformation. So worked with Sir Bill Beaumont to bring 17 women directors on by the end of my first year. So that was a big challenge. That was a really big challenge. But the Commonwealth, when I moved into the Commonwealth movement, it was a bit about getting back on track for most of my career, which has been in high performance sport in New Zealand, and trying to drive multi-sport success within a reasonably small country. And that was challenging. So, I kind of got involved in developing the high performance strategy and way forward for a country at a time when Sydney was awarded the Olympics. And we realized at that point in time, I was appointed in a Prime Minister task force on how we could make the most of Sydney. And we realized that we had no high performance system at all. So I was given the task, which was a fantastic project, but it was a tough one, of having a look around the world on where was good practice and how could a country of, at that stage, 4 million compete on a world stage. Knowing that there were sports like rugby and netball and cricket that are really important too, but from an Olympic perspective, I think we come out of the Sydney Olympics with 4 medals. So to turn that round and create a high performance system that, I remember writing that report to the government at this stage, said, well, look, we can't compete on money because we don't have a lot of commercial sponsorship, and, the taxation dollars to sport only goes so far. We can't compete on numbers because we don't have the opportunity in terms of some of the larger countries to churn and burn our athletes. So we needed to really focus on talent. So we needed to do something uniquely different. And that was a challenging year, was to get the government to invest in something which has been incredibly rewarding, coming out of the last Olympic Games with 20 medals from a country of that size. So there's been lots and lots of highs and lows. The challenge with Victoria, undoubtedly didn't see that coming. So, sometimes you go into a year and you think, okay, we've got some big challenges ahead of us, but let's take them on. It was the surprise factor. With just launching a strategic plan that everyone was really excited about. Victoria was going to be a really interesting, different games, but it was in hand. To me, it was about having to completely pivot and spend 12 months doing something that I wasn't expecting to do. But we're there. And so, bring on 25 and 26. That's what I say.
Well, your passion just comes through, Katie, and the examples you gave there as well shows I think you're probably the right person to be in charge of the Commonwealth Games Federation at the moment. So that leads me on to my final question. The future is secure?
Yeah. The kind of the feedback that we've got from our association with the Commonwealth Sports Ministers in Paris, with the heads of government at CHOGM this year, with a close working relationship with the Commonwealth Secretariat, and the concept of resetting and refreshing the games, and the excitement out there to actually be involved in that. We're really excited about the opportunities.
Well, we are really excited to be heading back to Glasgow in 2026. It was the city where we formed our bond, John and I, and probably started thinking about doing something like this. So, we are looking forward to Glasgow 2026 and seeing what 2030, 2034 has to offer as well. And we hope to continue telling your stories in the build up to those games as well. Thank you so much, Katie Sadleir, CEO of the Commonwealth Games Federation, for being our latest guest on Great British Bosses from Anything But Footy.
Thank you.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Your time and expertise are valuable, making Focus one of the most important resources to have at work. These days, professionals spend nearly half the work week on written communication, and it can be difficult to stay on task with all the emails and documents you have to get through. With Grammarly as your AI writing partner, you can stay focused and quickly get through your work with relevant real-time suggestions wherever you write. It works across 500,000 apps and websites, so it can help with everything, from brainstorming presentation ideas to sounding more confident and persuasive in emails and reports. For 15 years, Grammarly has offered best-in-class communication support and enterprise-grade security on a business model that doesn't sell your data. 93% of professionals report that Grammarly helps them get more work done. Download Grammarly for free at grammarly.com/podcast. That's GRAMMARLY.com/podcast.